Yes.
Just wait for another 3 minutes. It's exactly 3:58 now. So people will join. We'll have to give some 5 minutes time. Within 5 minutes, there are a lot of people will join.
Okay.
Because 181 is registered.
Okay.
Because for the past 2 days, we don't have the cable. The cable was cut outside of the institute because of this electricity people are digging. And they have cut the cable up. No internet for National Law School, ISEC, and Ambedkar School of Economics and UGC NAC. Now I'm hosting it from Dr. Vani, Professor Vani's home.
Okay. Okay.
She is the host now.
Okay. Okay.
Professor Thorat, this is Shyam Sundar, LK Deshpande student.
Okay.
Greetings to you.
Yeah, great.
I had the pleasure of listening to you on various occasions at the Indian Society of Labor Economics.
Oh,
And Lalit Deshpande, of course, always speaks high of you.
Good afternoon, and we are so happy that you could find the time to speak to us. Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, on a very important topic. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Shyam is one of the leading industrial relation economists in labor economics.
Yeah, yeah.
He is one of the very leading economists of this country now.
Okay.
After Venkatraman.
Okay. Okay.
He's my contemporary.
Okay.
I had the pleasure of bringing out 2 volumes in honor of Professor Lalit Deshpande.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I was published last year.
Yeah. No, very important contribution. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madesh, Sudha Deshpande once inquired about you. I told them that you have become a director.
Okay.
So they were very happy, though LK is not able to.
Yeah, thank you very
cannot
much.
comprehend much.
Right, they're all parents to us. Yeah.
And at our institute, the economics area has also noted that you have become a director.
I see. Okay, thank you.
And my friends you met with, they all are very happy. I told them my friend is a director now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So, Professor Thorat, how are you? Good to see you.
I am fine. Yeah. How are you?
Yeah, we have been okay and much more busy than when we were coming to ISEC. Actually, we have now home is only work. So we have forgotten what home is. So it's always for work now.
Director is keeping you busy?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't, I mean, our work keeps us busy.
Okay.
I mean, he facilitates our work. Definitely.
Yeah. He's keeping me busy, of course.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Yeah, one of our books is coming out on India, China. For the past 1 week, fully I was looking at the proof and the indexing and coordinating with authors and all that. So I just sent it late last night, yesterday, to back to Routledge. So I hope they don't come back with any other queries.
Yeah. Okay.
So you are based out of Delhi now or Nagpur, Professor Thorat?
Nagpur.
Okay. So how is the COVID situation in Nagpur?
Picking up fast.
Oh, picking up, huh? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it is at our ISEC's doorstep also, and we have 2 cases, and they are confirmed. Families have confirmed also. I think Professor Madheshwaran may have told you.
Yeah, it's inside the ISEC now.
Yeah. And the community where I live, there are 3 cases now, along with their families. So really very disturbing. So better to be safe than to be sorry.
Yeah.
It's an XLRI also. So.
Oh, is it right? Okay. But is Jamshedpur affected a lot by this?
Quite a bit.
Oh, is it
we are
right? Okay.
We are on the rising curve.
Mm. And I think the vaccine will come before the end of the pandemic.
We don't know.
And I'm really curious to know about Russia's vaccine. How even without completing phase 3 of the clinical trial, they've already like kind of implemented that. And I think the president's daughter, Putin, his daughter herself has taken it. And the entire world is really very, very concerned about this attitude that for them prestige comes before safety.
Yeah, there are even ethical issues.
Yeah, I don't know. And Professor Thorat, one thing I wanted to share with you is that last week, the first PhD student of our center, he successfully finished his Viva, defended his thesis.
Okay, that's a good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, PhD program is on rapid revival now.
Yeah, definitely, Professor Thorat.
Yeah.
So with your kind support and Professor Madheshwaran's inputs and guidance into this, we hope to revive this very soon.
All of you, all
Yeah.
faculty, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's our flagship program, and we are really looking forward to more
Yeah.
vibrant and bright students.
Yeah.
So it's 4:05 now, Professor Madheshwaran.
Yeah, just a minute, just 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Yes, once we start, suddenly all this will blown up. So now people just started. Kamath, can we wait for another 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes? Kamath?
No problem, sir.
Can we wait for 2-3 minutes?
Okay.
Yeah.
So where is Miss Mani? We are not able to see her in her home.
She is hearing, she is hosting, and she can't sit in front of the computer. She is hearing, sitting next to Kamath.
Oh, okay.
It is 4:48. We will start. 2 minutes. Shyam, can we start? Eventually they will join, so that I'll start my introduction. Shyam?
Yeah, we can start.
Yeah, come to the video, please.
Yeah, we can start.
Yes, sir. See, welcome to the 7th webinar lecture series of ISAC. At the outset, I thank Professor Thorat, the chairperson of the Board of Governors, and other Board of Governors, BOG members and life members for their constant support, and my faculty and students. They're giving a very constant support for the administration to conduct this webinar series. And of course, our students are very interested and they have benefited a lot from this webinar series. First of all, I request our chairman, Professor Thorat, to give some initial remark. Then I will introduce the speaker and give the initial remark to the topic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Madheshwaran. Yeah, I think this is the one more lecture in this series, and this has been an extremely useful exercise. As far as this series is concerned, it has really educated us on several issues by inviting the important people in the field. We are very happy that we have among us today K.R. Sundar, who will speak to us on the issue related to labor. I welcome him and I just pass on to you to begin the lecture.
Thank you very much, sir.
To introduce him, and then we request him to start the lecture.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, and welcome to this webinar series. And at the outset, I welcome the speaker, Professor K.R. Shyamsundar from XLRI. Professor Shyamsundar, on behalf of ISAC fraternity, I welcome you to this very important webinar series. And I would like to say his CV is very long CV, but I just would like to say a few words about his CV and his achievements. And then I would like to say some few initial remarks before his lecture. Professor Shyamsundar, Dr. Shyamsundar is working as professor, Human Resource Management area at the Xavier Labor Relation Institute, Xavier Business School in Jamshedpur. He holds a PhD degree in economics from Mumbai University. As he rightly pointed out in the beginning, he is a student of, we always consider Professor L.K. Deshpande as father of labor economics in India. He is a student of Professor L.K. Deshpande. My friend Shyamsundar always tried to say that Professor L.K. Deshpande in his lifetime all the time. And he has published over 60 research articles and book reviews in the field of industrial relations and labor economics in well-known research outlets in India. He has written extensively on labor law reforms and contemporary issues in industrial relations and labor markets in India, and has written more than 60 articles in the print and electronic media like the Business Line, Business Standard, Financial Express, and The Wire on the contemporary themes in the world of work, especially changes in the labor market governance and their implications for decent work. He has published 13 books and 5 edited books on various themes in industrial relations and labor regulations. He has been widely quoted in the print media on the contemporary issues about industrial relations and labor laws reforms. Of course, anybody reads the Business Standard, Financial Express quite often, that most of the time the print media, when they talk about the recent labor laws changes, and without Shyamsundar's comments and observation, you must not have seen any article for the past 5 months during this COVID time. And he has done several research projects for organizations like International Labour Organization, ILO, the European Union, Global Union Federation, and ICSSR, and so on. He has been visiting fellow at the ILO, International Institute of Labour Studies, Geneva during October-November 2006. He was invited to make a special presentation at high-level tripartite meeting to commemorate the completion of 60 years of passage of ILO Convention on collective bargaining in October 2009. Of course, he's a very young economist, have been called to give a special presentation on the high-level tripartite meeting in the ILO Convention, which I would like to mentioned very specifically. He was also selected to visit China during November 2008 as a part of the cultural exchange program between India and China to study labor law reforms in China. He was also invited to make presentation at the experts meeting on labor administration. He is on the editorial board of the Indian Journal of Labor Economics and the MIT Journal of Labor Economics. This is the brief CV of Professor Shamsundar. Of course, as I have mentioned previously, he is a well-known industrial relations and labor regulations person. And of course, in every Indian Society for Labor Economics conference, without his consultation, the theme of the Indian Society for Labor Economics never happened. And his participation to suggest the theme for the industrial relation area is always commendable. And very proudly, I can say that he's my contemporary, right from my PhD days. We are all, right from our student days, we are friends, and we have been growing together. And as far as today's topic, it's a very timely topic. As you all know, economic liberalization took place in a concerted and aggressive manner since 1991. The demand for a comprehensive reform of labor inspection, labor administrative system, and labor laws has been continuously mounted by the crisis of labor market regulation and employers. This is the first one that all of you know. The second one is that primarily employers demand labor market flexibility in terms of freedom of hiring of contract labor for any kind of work, means core and non-core, and firing workers and closure of establishments without any government intervention and complete liberalization of labor inspection system. So owing to strident opposition and countrywide protest by rather United Trade Union movement, the reforms at the central level was prevented until recently. Since codification of this central labor law, all we have been hearing in the newspaper, has been happening at the central level. At the same time, the labor market, which is segmented in many ways, has been further characterized increasingly by informality and precarity. Many workers did not have even a formal employment contract, and half of the workforce in the non-agricultural sector were not eligible for paid leave, nor they enjoyed social security benefit. So thus, this pre-COVID, the industrial relation system and the labor market were already in a state which did not assure labor rights. But after this COVID-19 dealt, the COVID-19 dealt heavy blows to the society at large and workers and employers as well. State government one after another introduced changes in the central labor laws, and some even suspended many of them that all of you are reading in the newspaper. The COVID-19 shock, not only an economic one, has shown the darker side of the labor market in terms of huge deficits in implementation of labor laws, which has been worsened by adverse labor law changes. So I hope, I'm sure that Professor Shamsundar will reflect upon some of these issues today. And thank you very much, Sam. Once again, welcome to this webinar series. And I hand over the mic to you to give your presentation.
Thank you, firstly, Professor Thorat, and my good friend, Dr. Madheshwaran, and I see also Professor Narasimha Reddy. Professor Thorat, it is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be speaking in your presence, perhaps for the first time, I think, in my life. And we all know the kind of path-breaking work that you have been doing, particularly contributing to the social, the theme of social justice in the labor market and in the larger society. So my greetings to you first.
Thank you.
And of course, it's also a pleasure to speak to the faculty members and others at the ISEC, especially when my good friend, Dr. Madheshwaran, is the director of the institute. And I take this opportunity to congratulate him and wish him best in his endeavor as a director. And Sir, Reddy sir, thanks for being here. It assures me, your presence assures me. Well, Madesh has already given a kind of a bird's eye view of the whole theme that I'm going to talk about. Basically, I'm making 4 propositions, which I hope to demonstrate in the time that I have been given. Proposition number 1, India has chosen the wrong strategy to govern the labor market in particular and the economy in general, which is a neoliberal and neoclassical driven strategy. Proposition 2, pre-COVID, the labor market had already suffered considerable setbacks in terms of rising unemployment, extreme intensification of precarity and informality in the labor market, and had witnessed considerable and substantial dilution of labor rights. Proposition 3, during COVID, on the pretext of COVID and the extraordinary times that COVID has presented, enormous amount of disruptions have been inflicted upon the labor market, particularly the vulnerable sections of the society. And I'm afraid the caste dimension or the vulnerable workers dimension has been completely lost sight of, and we don't see much debate on that. And I'm sure Dr. Madheshwaran would take lead on that under the guidance of Professor Thorat. 4th proposition, post-COVID, the labor market would be far more vulnerable than it was in the pre-COVID. These are the 4 propositions that would largely be reflected in my presentation. Now, basically, as an academic, I can stylish 2 broad systems of labor market governance. One is the neoliberal and neoclassical model of developmental model. And when I speak, it is related to the industrialization system and labor market. So basically, this model argues that labor is a factor of production, nothing more than that. And it argues for deregulation of labor markets in consistence with the free economic regime. And it also argues for various kinds of flexibility, numerical flexibility, functional flexibility, wage flexibility, and so on and so forth, which I characterize in terms of labor market flexibility. Argues for low-cost model strategy as opposed to high-road strategy through technological developments, cheap labor, low labor standards, dispensable labor, and hugely capitalizes on the circulating and footloose migrant workers, both internally and globally. So this is a kind of a model that says that if labor market is deregulated and industrial relation system is structured in such a manner to enable profit maximization, foreign direct investment will flood in, employment will, production and productivity will rise, employment will be generated, incomes will rise, and poverty alleviation will take place. This is the kind of research that has been led by the not so now infamous and notorious paper by Besley and Burgess, in 2004 and popularized later. Opposed to that is we have the decent work model or the institutional model, which is based on the International Labour Standards Framework and the Philadelphia Declaration, And of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which regards labor as not a commodity, decommodification of labor. The Philadelphia Declaration has 4 propositions. The first one is labor is not a commodity, and it argues for freedom of association and collective bargaining, essential for progress. Poverty anywhere constitutes threat to prosperity, and stresses on the role of social dialogue. And of course, we have the UN covenants, like International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights. So this does not commodify labor. All its premises are diametrically opposed to the ones that I elaborated when I talked about neoliberal arguments. So now we come to, of course, the choice would be, the right choice of labor market governance would be the institutional model. That would be my argument. We had a classic industrialization system which was devised during the command economy, wherein the state played an important role consistent with the state intervention in the product market. I'm not going to repeat all those arguments which we are known. State intervention largely had 3 pillars: very expansive labor laws, central labor laws and the state labor laws, because labor is on the concurrent list, supported by a strong labor administration system with a labor inspection, and a proactive judiciary, which was guided by the principles of principles contained in the Constitution and the international treaties to which India is a signatory and otherwise. Of course, the state intervention was to be supplemented by the tripartite consultation. We have the history of tripartism, of which ILO calls it a social dialogue. And of course, the Labor Ministers' Conference, in order to bring in federal harmony in the labor laws, and the Chief Labor Inspectors Conference to strengthen occupational safety and health. So this was the institutional framework that was designed during the classic era of the command economy. The labor laws were based largely on 5 subjects. The generic labor laws, which provided for registration and also governed the conditions of work, like Factories Act for the factories, Plantation Labor Act, the Shops and Establishment Act, Mines Acts, and so on and so forth. Then we had the laws on the industrial relations system, that is the Trade Unions Act, the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, and the Industrial Disputes Act. Then we had the social security laws, like the Provident Fund law, the ESI medical insurance law, the payment of gratuity, the Maternity Benefit Act, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the wage code, wage laws, the Payment of Wages Act, the Minimum Wages Act 1948, based on the Fair Wages Committee 1948. Then, of course, the Payment of Bonus Act, etc. And of course, the Special Workers Categories Act, which included Contract Labor Act, the Children Labor Act, the Building and Other Construction Workers Act, Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, and of course, the Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation Act. So these were the numerous labor laws that the central government had enacted over a period. But the labor laws concerning the unorganized workers, which began in right earnest in 1948 with the Minimum Wages Act, did not see much progress. It developed, evolved in bits and pieces in 1979. In 1970, the government passed the Contract Labor Regulation Abolition Act. I see Dr. Meenakshi Rajiv, who has written on that research paper. Then the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act in 1979, and the Building and Other Construction Workers Act, and the CES Act for the Building and Other Construction Workers in 1996. And thanks to National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector, the 2000 Act, Unorganized Workers Social Security Act. So this is the elaborate framework that we have had in the classic past. Then came the liberalization and the arguments which Dr. Madheshwaran outlined. If the product market is liberalized, globalized, and sought to be privatized, then the labor market must also be deregulated in order that product market liberalization outcomes could be maximized. So the critics of labor market regulation, primarily domestic and global employers and international financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank, lobbied heavily for it. Thanks to strident protests by the rather united trade union movement, 18 strikes, as Dr. Madheshwaran mentioned, took place between 1991 and 2019-20. In fact, we had recently, during the COVID time, we had the protests, countrywide protests, and also political opposition. The labor market reforms could not proceed the way the governments wanted. But we need to understand a simple fact that owing to the huge amount of lobbying and a kind of a neoclassical and neoliberal driven research work that popularized the need for labor market flexibility in order to ease the conduct of business in the economies. Various countries, including India, was committed to introduce labor market reforms. When I say labor market reforms, it's a huge banner because employers have large number of demands. But I shall concentrate primarily on two demands of the employers. A, to provide labor flexibility, which means a numerical flexibility and wage flexibility to the employers. That is to enable free hiring of contract workers for any kind of work, and also to amend the Industrial Disputes Act to provide freedom to the employers to hire and fire workers at will, like the North American model, and also to close business establishments. This was labor flexibility. On the other hand, they wanted to underplay the role of minimum wages and also to weaken the bargaining power of the trade unions. To sum it up, the entire neoliberal argument sought to strike at the foundations of the functioning of the collective institutions in the labor market. The collective institutions would largely be the trade union mobilization, the trade union mobilization, their collective bargaining at the national and industry level, and also the right to strike, the right to minimum wages, etc. And sought to individualize and decentralize the labor market and industrial relations system. So this was the labor market reform debate that had gripped the country between 1991 and 2014 for various reasons, as I said, primarily owing to the protest by the trade unions and also the opportunistic political opposition. The central government could not really bring about the reforms. Then the central government did a very clever strategy by shifting the reform mandate onto the state governments. On the other hand, the employers also started complaining about the harassment meted out by the labor inspectorate system, and compared and coined a new term called Inspector Raj, akin to the licensed Raj, which was under the IDRA Act 1955. So they wanted to liberalize the labor inspection system. So together, they completed complete deregulation and dilution of the labor market system and governance system. So in 2014, the NDA too came to power under the prime ministership of Mr. Narendra Modi, and then the clamor for reforms started rising considerably. In the meanwhile, of course, buoyed up by Mr. Modi's prime ministership and his pro-reform tag, the BJP ruled states like Rajasthan started introducing critical labor law reforms by providing labor flexibility by amending the Industrial Disputes Act and also raising the threshold of the Factories Act from 10 to 20 for firms which employ power, and 20 to 40 for those firms, factories which do not employ power, and then raising the threshold of the Contract Labor Act from 20 to 50. The main learning the labor market regulation principle is that small factories, small contractors will be outside the purview of any kind of regulation. They need not register, they need not obtain a license, and they will not be bound by the labor laws like the Factories Act or the Shops and Establishment Act, or by the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition Act. So this is what the business community has been arguing for. Without regulation, the economic establishments would grow. With regulations, they do not grow. This was clothed in the argument by certain economists, labor economists and others, by giving it the missing middle. The missing middle is nothing but the skewed development on either ends, the small and the long size of the establishment, and there is a huge missing middle in the sense that establishment either prefer to remain small or they are already large. So they do not, and because of the labor regulations, they are not able to transit from small into medium and then medium into large. And they don't want to become, and the existing medium are trapped because if they become large, if they became large, then the labor law regulations will kick in. So this was the kind of various arguments that have been presented. And the World Bank also started giving the ease of doing business rankings, which provided further battleground for, war cries for the employees organizations to go for, argue for labor market reforms. In the meanwhile, we have the NSSO data, which Dr. Madheshwaran had used considerably in his exercises. And of course, we had the periodic labor force survey. And the point that I'm trying to make is that in the post-reform period, labor market was not only dual, but became multiply segmented. This is what Professor T.S. Papola and Professor Lalit Deshpande have been arguing. It is not the simple dualistic model, it is a multiple segmented model of labor market we have. Labor markets are segmented because of geographical origin, because of gender, because of cost, because of various other demographic features, but also primarily, now I come to my industrial relations angle, because of the institutional coverage or its absence, or because of coverage of law or its absence. So I'm going to speak of two kinds of segmentation: union covered or union uncovered, that is collective institutions covered or collective institutions uncovered. When I say union, trade union, collective bargaining and strikes. On the other hand, law covered and law uncovered. So labor market has been characterized by multiple segmentations. And of course, it also led to tremendous amount of precarity and informality. Informality, we know, proportions like 93 and all have been doing rounds. But I'm going to talk about the one that has come out in the periodic labor force survey, and which I would like to talk about. By the way, of course, on the informality, the 2017-18 periodic labor force survey says that overall we have 83.5% of the total workers, that is 465.1 million, are informal in nature, particularly manufacturing, wherein all the labor laws pertain to largely manufacturing. In manufacturing, 47.7 million workers were in the informal segment, and 8.7 million only were in the formal segment. That gives us 85% of the manufacturing sector was informal, according to 2017-18. In the non-manufacturing, where construction is the dominant sector, 95% of the total employment was informal. And service sector, of course, we have nearly 79% of the workers were in the informal sector. And of course, we had low labor market force work participation. We all know the figures. 56% of the male workers were participating in the labor market, 19% female labor market participation, and of course, overall, we have 38% of the people participating in the labor market. Unemployment has been largely hovering around 6% in the recent times. But what is important for us in terms of industrial relations and labor market is that in 2017-18, 71% of the regular workers in the non-agriculture sector did not have a written contract, written employment contract. 7 out of 10 workers did not, of the regular workers, I'm not talking of casual workers. Self-employed workers do not come here. We are talking of regular wage employment. So 71% of the regular wage salaried employees did not have a written job contract. 55% of the regular workers were not eligible for paid leave, and 50% of the regular workers were not eligible for any form of social security, any 2 or 3 forms of social security, meaning old age security, medical security, maternity benefit, gratuity, and of course, sickness and other benefits. So this is the precarity that characterized pre-COVID. And let us talk about the labor intensification. If we take labor intensification, we talk about regular and wage salaried employees. We have this classification for April-June 2018-19 in urban areas. Factories are mostly concentrated in the urban areas, so I have taken urban areas. More than 50% of the regular workers worked more than 48 hours in a week. 52.6% to be very specific in urban area during April-June 2018-19. We all know they had quarterly data for PLFS 2017-18. So I'm taking the last quarter, which is representative of all the quarters. 2018-19, 52.6% of the workers worked more than 48 hours, which is according to the Factories Act. Workers are supposed to work, are expected to work for not more than 48 hours. So, and if we take more than 60 hours, it is 19% of the workers worked more than 60 hours. So I'm specifying this particular statistic because I'm going to talk about what happened during COVID. Now, if we take unemployment by social groups, which Dr. Madesh and Professor Thorat have already talked much about, the scheduled tribes, particularly in the urban areas, in the 2018-19 PLFS data, 10.5% of them were unemployed. Male, 10.5% were unemployed. Female, 14.4% were unemployed. If you take the persons, 11.5% were unemployed. As opposed to OBC and others were 5.8 for male, 9.8 for female, and 6.6 for male. In other words, the scheduled tribe unemployment in the urban areas were almost double as that of others. So we see the labor market high, and of course, if we go by the union coverage, even if I make generous estimation, not more than 1/6 of the 465 million workers will be belonging to, will be a member of any trade union, registered trade union. That is only 15% of the total workers in India were members in by 2011-12 NSSO data. And if we take the collective bargaining coverage, that is proportion of workers who are covered by collective agreements, it is less than 2%. It is not more than 2% of the total workers who are covered by collective bargaining agreements. We see that the workers, and if we take, if we take coverage by labor laws, minimum wage law is supposed to be the universal law because Schedule 1 of the minimum wage is it covers agriculture sector, Schedule 2 non-agriculture sector. If we take the minimum wage law, not more than 42% of the total workers will be covered under minimum wage law. In fact, the finance minister, when she announced Atmanirbhar package in May 2020, and of course the labor minister, they conceded that the wage code, the earlier minimum wage law covered only 40% of the workers and 60% were uncovered. I'm talking of potential coverage. In labor regulation, we need to make a distinction between potential coverage, that is theoretically eligible covered workers are called potential coverage. Actual coverage, that is those who are actually benefited by law, if we take them, it is less than one-fifth of the total workers. In other words, there is a yawning gap between potentially covered workers, which is a minimum wage law, which is the most covered labor law, which is 40%, and the actually covered workers are less than 20%. Now, I'll give you an example as to the limited coverage of the labor laws. Minimum wage law, as I said, is the law which covers both agriculture sector and non-agriculture sector. If we take the total, any law needs to be supervised as to its implementation. Maharashtra government has given a statement saying that given the total number of inspectors who are responsible to implement minimum wages in the state of Maharashtra, and if we take the total number of agricultural and non-agriculture establishments to be inspected in Maharashtra, the government of Maharashtra has said that even for a minimum wage inspector to pay courtesy visit, one visit to all the establishments which are covered by the Minimum Wages Act, it will take 4 to 5 years. I repeat, to make a courtesy visit, single visit to all the establishments that are covered under the Minimum Wages Act for the inspectorate of the minimum wages in the state of Maharashtra, it will take 4 to 5 years. And we have the employers crying out that there is an Inspector Raj. So this shows the ironic nature of the employers' criticism of the labor market regulation. So we have, now let me summarize. There's an appropriate time for me to summarize. Post-reform period, we have the neoliberal economic agenda in general and labor market deregulation demand in particular, taking precedence over labor rights. Number two, the labor market is multiply segmented, particularly in terms of union coverage, institutional coverage, and in terms of law coverage. Point three, the state governments, the labor law and inspection reform mandate has largely been shifted to the state governments for various reasons, and state governments had already started deregulating the labor market and liberalizing inspection systems. On the contrary, we see that even the widest labor law, namely the Minimum Wages Act, has only covered fewer workers potentially as well as actually. The labor inspectorate system has been under-equipped. And thirdly, the union coverage in India is barely very low, just less than 1/16 of the workers. I'm making a generous estimate. If one asked effective union coverage, it would be less than 8%. And then collective bargaining coverage, which provides regulated benefits, is less than 3%. It is actually 2.2%. So we find, and of course, the precarious, I've given you 70% of the regular workers did not even have a job contract, and 50% they were not covered by Social Security, and so on and so forth. And labor intensification was very high because more than half of the regular workers worked more than the 48 hours. They might have been paid overtime benefit if the law would have been implemented effectively, if there was a trade union. So so I have covered the first proposition, and the second proposition, and the third proposition. Now I go to the fourth proposition, that is what has happened during the COVID time. During the COVID time, of course, because of the national lockdowns and various kinds of lockdowns, the economic activities came to a complete standstill. Business could not operate. Workers could, though they wanted to go for work, they could not report for work. The national lockdown the complete national lockdown was started. It extended from March 25th to April 19th. From April 19th onwards, the rural areas were largely liberalized because COVID-19 was considered to be largely an urban phenomenon, and urban areas witnessed very, very gradual liberalizations. In the meanwhile, of course, as we all know, businesses do have some kind of a cushion, and of course they did suffer, to be fair to them. So the trade after March 25th, because of the sudden nature of the lockdown, migrant workers in Delhi and other places started migrating because they were evicted. So the migrant workers were called entrapped workers because they were neither wanted by the host region nor wanted by the home region. So they were entrapped. So they felt they were evicted from the households, they lost their jobs, and they were also became physically insecure. So some kind of a spontaneous movement took place, and the Ministry of Home Affairs on March 29th issued a directive invoking the National Disaster Management Act, NDMA 2005, and issued a directive to all the factory owners and shops and establishments, employers, that during the period of the lockdown, employers shall pay complete wages to the workers of all kinds till the closure, till the lockdown ends, full wages. Please understand, this is a directive issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs invoking the National Disaster Management Act 2005. But various surveys showed that this directive was not honored. Of course, micro, small and medium establishments had a genuine case that production was not taking place, sales were not taking place, and they approached the Supreme Court. And in the meanwhile, the migrant workers started moving about in their own fashion. We all know what took place. I need not repeat the woeful things that happened, heart-wrenching stories of migrant workers. And the Supreme Court was approached by the activists towards the end of April, and then, of course, the Supreme Court appreciated the measures taken by the central government and dismissed the petitions and said that the central government is doing its bit in order to take care of the welfare of the migrant workers. But then became the problem, and then a lot of episodes took place. And in the meanwhile, of course, we had in place labor laws which were purported to protect the unorganized workers. We had the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979 to protect the welfare of the migrant workers. We had the Building and Other Construction Workers Act 1996 to protect the welfare of the construction workers. And we had the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008 to protect the welfare of the unorganized workers. But all the three labor laws, I'm sorry to say, were never implemented during the period from which they were legislated. The entire, the inadequacies and the huge non-implementation of two labor laws, particularly the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979 and the Unorganized Workers Act 2008, became totally exposed when the migrant workers had to run helter-skelter for their benefits. And there was an RTI which was given to which was sent to the Central Labor Commission's office and to the Ministry of Labor, as to whether there were any statistics pertaining to the migrant workers, and the government could not give a reply. None of the state governments ever bothered to implement the legislation of Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979, even though the law makes an elaborate, though the law suffers from certain shortcomings, it provides for the protection of the migrant workers, registration of the contractors, maintenance of records of the migrant workers, but none of the state governments did ever implement them. We had the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, under which it provided for employment of local facilitators, institutional facilitators, registration of the unorganized workers, self-declared unorganized workers at the local areas, and provision of portable smart card, unorganized workers smart card, portable card. But none of these were ever implemented. The central government were to constitute Central Labor Advisory Board. It constituted in 2011 according to the Ministry of Labor and Employment report, annual report 2018-19. It was constituted in 2011, and the same status was maintained till 2018-19. And none of the workers were ever given the portable smart cards, though the scheme was conceived in 2016 but dropped in 2018 because Aadhaar was supposed to have taken care of all the needs. So in effect, and of course, when we come to the Building and Other Construction Workers Act, we find that 30,000 lakh crores of funds were unutilized by the central government and the state government, and the Supreme Court from 2009 to 2018 has been passing strictures and chastising the central government and the state governments to constitute welfare boards, which are a legal right entitlement, and to disperse the funds, the cess that is created from the builders and the constructors, 1 or 2% of the cess that is collected, and which is the 30,000 lakh crores that I spoke of. The Supreme Court ordered the central and state governments to implement the Building and Other Construction Workers Act, and it was can we imagine from 2009 to 2018, a body no less than the Supreme Court passed strictures and asked the central government and the state governments to start implementing and properly utilize the funds. So, and during the COVID time, these funds were dispersed by the state governments. But still, according to the Business Standard report, only 16%, not more than 1/5 of the fund were distributed by the state governments. So state governments like Jharkhand or Bihar or Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, not Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, Bihar and Rajasthan did not distribute these funds. And of course, the migrant workers, we did not have even statistics, excepting the census statistics. So migrant workers became faceless, numberless, and of course, non-legal entity, and we were subjected to much of the deprivations that arose out of the COVID-19 situation. So we have the informal sector workers, of them, the migrant workers, the construction sector workers, and the unorganized workers, despite being protected in some ways or the other by legislation, were completely exposed to the adverse vicissitudes of the COVID-19. So we find a complete, a complete exposure of inadequate, inefficient, and utterly lacking labor market governance system. We had the laws, we had the inspectorates, we had the labor administration system, but these construction sector, according to PLFS 2017-18, employed about 55 million workers. And if we take the entire unorganized workers, according to the ILO, 400 million workers were on the brink of poverty during COVID-19 period. So all the, of course, agriculture has never been regulated. Professor Narasimha Reddy will bear this out. So we have, I mean, what are we talking about? We are supposed to be having one of the highly regulated labor market and industrial relation system in the world, but we find 400 million workers were exposed to vulnerabilities, precarities, and all adverse vicissitudes, despite being covered by certain labor laws. So it exposed complete absence of labor administration. So that is the point that I wanted to make. To pile up, to add fuel to the fire, several state governments took the COVID-19 as an opportune time, which they called it as a right time, in order to introduce disruptive changes in the labor laws. I would not go into the details. I would broadly classify them into two. Number one, totally 14 states amended the Factories Act to extend the maximum hours of work from 8 to 12 in a day, 10 to 12, some states 10, some states 11, let us say broadly 10 to 12 in a day, and 50 to 72 hours in a week, which flies against the first ILO convention on the hours of work 001 in 1919, which British India ratified, and independent India endorsed the ratification. And the Factories Act, thanks to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, in 1943, he moved the Indian Labour Conference to say that earlier the Factories Act from 1881 to 1928 had hours of work around 12 hours to 10 to 12 hours. But Dr. Ambedkar took note of the ILO Convention 001 and proposed in the Indian Labour Conference that the hours of work must be rationalized and brought to the levels of the global standards, that is namely 8 hours of work and 48 hours a week. And thanks to him, his vision, that Factories Act was legislated, and the 8 hours of work and 48 hours of work was inserted in the Factories Act, and anything other than that, any minute over that, will be eligible for overtime pay of double the wage rate. But citing labor shortages as a pretext, which was of course a reality for certain sectors like construction, the state governments applied the extension of working hours systemically. So this is where I find fault with. There could have been micro solutions, but depending on the sector or firms, and the existing Factories Act is sufficient enough to deal with any kind of labor shortages, because overtime is provided for in the Factories Act. 14 states legislated, 3 states withdrew, so 11 states had amended the Factories Act to extend hours of work from 48 to 72 in a week. I'm talking of maximum, maybe 60 to 72. We already saw from the PLFS data, already the workers were working more than 48 hours. I said that 52.64% of the workers, regular workers, were working more than 48 hours, which shows that because of the low level of wages, workers were working overtime in order to earn decent wages. So this is something that Dr. Madheshwaran, I request him to look into, that work intensification has been a labor market feature. Because of the lower minimum wages, worker worked for more number of hours in order to earn decent income. This is what the employers in the national capital region, particularly Gurgaon, said, that workers are willing to work for 10 hours, 11 hours. Why are the trade unions protesting against them? Because workers want to maximize their wages, and of course they would like to work overtime because of the base lower level wage rates, and it becomes work intensification, and often they are not paid the statutory double the overtime wages, but they are paid single overtime wages. We have a lot of evidence in garment factories and others. So this everything is justified in terms of ease of doing business, and the employer saying that workers want to do, why the trade unions and the law are obstructing them. This is the kind of disruptive argument that they give. The second kind of reform is that they expanded the thresholds of the important labor laws, which completely exempted the small establishments, small factories, small by which I mean less than 20 using power, less than 40 not using power in terms of factories, and contractors, those employing less than 50 workers. They were not regulated by any law. We all know that these small contractors are the ones who exploit and who are fly-by-night operators, and they do not observe labor laws. Big contractors, those who employ 100, 500 like TeamLease or security agencies and others, they generally are labor law compliant. The labor law non-compliant, which even the Second National Commission on Labor observed, are the ones who are small contractors. Now, in the name of enabling the crossover of the small establishments to medium and larger, these thresholds have been changed. And lastly, the UP and Madhya Pradesh amended the Industrial Disputes Act and various other labor laws to exempt the establishments from all kinds of labor laws and all kinds of clauses. In other words, in the UP, can we imagine UP introduced an ordinance, a 2-page ordinance, which said that 34 labor laws will be suspended and important labor laws like industrial dispute will be weakened. In other words, workers will not have the right to form trade unions, right to get them registered, right to raise industrial disputes, right to take it to the collective bargaining, right to go take it to conciliation, and right to have it adjudicated by the labor courts and industrial tribunals, and so on and so forth. What I called these in my article in the Economic and Political Weekly and other places as introduction of labor market anarchy. So the COVID-19 has witnessed two kinds of situations. On the governance side, complete dilution of labor laws, and the CII has demanded the central government to introduce UP and MP kind of labor law reforms so that the business can cope up with the losses inflicted by the COVID-19 situation. One sympathizes with the business community, but this is not the institutional response that the government should be coming with respect to the industrial relations and labor market. On the other hand, because of the complete indifference and historical indifference and ignorance in terms of a complete absence of administration of labor laws concerning unorganized workers, unorganized and vulnerable workers were exposed to considerable adversities during the COVID period. And finally, the post-COVID situation looks bleak because the central government is planning to introduce 4 codes. Code on wages has already been passed, code on industrial relations, code on occupational safety and health, and code on social security, which do not promise much labor rights, but promise lot of labor flexibility and ease of doing flexibility to the employers. So I summarize my argument by concluding that post 1991, India chose a wrong labor market and economic system regime of regulation. Secondly, during the pre-COVID, labor rights have been substantially diluted. I'm not talking of the Supreme Court judgments. It will take a lot of time, and labor market was already fluid, multiply segmented, informal, and even precarious. During COVID, disruptive changes have been introduced, and post-COVID, given the kind of signals that we see and given the kind of arguments, neoliberal arguments that are advanced, that India should occupy the space vacated by China, and there should be more flexibility and capture the global supply chain contracts. We will witness more and more instances of labor flexibility, and thereby labor rights are likely to be more diluted, and in that sense the socially backward and the informal sector workers will stand to lose further, and even the so-called, once upon a time called as elite workforce, they will also feel that the ground beneath their feet is slowly breaking down. So I conclude by saying that we are moving away from the institutional model far away in search of labor flexibility and ease of doing business, and thereby damaging the institutional and social justice fabric that was assured and envisaged by the Constitution and also by the International Labour Organization's ILS framework. And in the process, India has violated many of the ILO conventions, and thereby we are not likely to be viewed with favor by our peers in the global economy. Thanks.
You have to unmute, Professor Madheshwaran. We can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Sham. Such a wonderful and thought-provoking lecture, which have, within a short span of time, that you have given the whole history of labor law, how it has been evolved and how it has been changed, what is the present situation, and what is going to be what is going to be there as far as this relation in our country. And with this, I request Professor Sugata Thorat as a chairperson would like to say some observation, and then Professor Reddy is there. Professor Reddy. Professor Reddy. Professor Kannan was there in between. He said, Professor Reddy. Professor Thorat. Okay, let them come back, and now yeah, Professor Thorat has come, and sorry, no, you please unmute, please unmute, please unmute.
Give me 10 minutes and I will then have my remark.
Okay, fine. Then Professor Reddy.
No.
Okay, Professor Kannan also left, and Professor Reddy also was visiting left, I believe. And now I request my colleagues from ISEC, anybody come forward to ask any question. I don't want to read out your name. You are more flexible, like a labor market flexibility. You are more flexible to ask questions. Please, Kala is raising hand first.
Thank you, Professor Madheshwaran. Thank you, Professor Sham Sundar, for this very passionate and thought-provoking lecture. And what I thought was, as economists, we always think about the trade-off between efficiency and equity. And I listened to your lecture closely, and Karnataka is also one of the states which followed this bandwagon of liberalizing labor laws, right, in addition to land reforms. So that's a different story. But I think as academics, we agree that whenever you liberalize a law, you're also making it easy for the business to create jobs, and also for the migrant worker or the vulnerable worker to end up in a job. There is a high chance that he or she will end up in a job when the labor market is liberalized, labor reforms are initiated. So in order for me to think like you, that all these labor laws are really bad and they have left the workers very, very vulnerable, I'm sorry, I need a more rigorous empirical evidence of the number of people who were employed before the pre-COVID, a number of people who were employed after the COVID, and what was their average wage level before and what was it after. Without such systematic empirical evidence in the pre and the post COVID, I'm not really very convinced that all these labor laws make the workers really vulnerable, because I think there is a strong efficiency perspective to it. You look at it from the point of view of the business also has to survive, and the cost of doing business has greatly increased. Like you go to a supermarket, you go to a grocery store, everywhere they have to have a thermal scanner, you need to give sanitization, and you need to allow less employees, you need to allow less customers to meet the distance of meet the norms of social distancing. So I think that there is a strong efficiency perspective here, which I think we need to look at. Thank you for your response.
Thank you, Professor Kala. I request any of our colleagues or students to come forward to ask question. I could see Minachi Raju, Professor Rajsekhar is there. He has worked a lot on social security. Is there anybody who would like to come forward to ask question? Any students? Meenakshi?
Yeah, if nobody is asking, let me ask a question. Yeah, because when we listen to this is taking from Kala, when we listen to the entrepreneur side, they would always say that because of the labor laws, we are not able to function. So they always talk about that. So that's one thing. That from the Kala's point of view. The second, you talked quite a bit about the implementation process, which of course you said that I have worked on contract labor, and I have seen that main problem is the implementation, whereas there are so many things are there in the laws itself, but because of this contractor doing exploiting the labor, and the principal employer is not doing its duty, I would say, because it is supposed to check whether the contractor has done things properly or not. It is not doing that, and in the process laborers lose. But then what solutions do we have? That we know that we have a problem of implementation of this regulation or acts. That some kind of your perspective on that would be very helpful. In how do we make sure that implementation is done, especially as you rightly said that the smaller contractors who fly by night, comes today, will be finishes tomorrow, and even the provident fund money they will cut from the worker, but finally workers do not get anything. So what do we do? And the third thing is a little broader question, and what do you think about it? Now this migrant labor has returned home, and not many of them will go back to the cities very soon, given the kind of situation we are having. So what kind of future one would see for these return migrants who would be in a rural setting? Because NREGA, I think they have already almost exhausted their NREGA now. So what is the role the rural non-farm may play, or what should we do about this? What kind of policies? Thank you.
Professor Rajsekhar, and then Professor Lakshma.
Unmute.
Okay. Thank you. It is an interesting lecture, sir. Very informative. But I don't have any comments or questions. But I want to know, we have heard across the states, the labor issues, governance, etc., etc. But what is the situation of Kerala? Kerala is the hotspot. For example, exporting the laborers. This is just I want to know from the speakers. Thank you.
Okay, there is another question is Manas Kumar Senapati. Can you unmute and ask your question? Manas Kumar Senapati. Or I will read his question. Manas Kumar Senapati is asking a question that what should be the strategy for overcoming this Inspector Raj under this pandemic? Anybody?
Sir, this is Dr. Kusuma speaking, sir.
Yeah, please.
My question, yes, sir. My question is, sir, in spite of non-dilution before COVID or before the new legislations, we have 100 and odd lacunas in the labor laws, a special reference to social security legislations, which were never met, never continue to do it, and especially with social security, sir. Now, with the changing of the circumstances and Venkat, sir, as sir said, the government has asked the industrialists to pay off, but later after 10 days in the midnight at 11 o'clock, the government of India has served a GO that they need not pay the wages. It is not the question of the migratory labors. It is not the question. All the time, the social security legislations are always been compromised, rather exploited. Now, at this juncture, because we are competing with China and we are trying to compromise, rather dilute with this, what will be the state of affairs? Are we getting back to our colonial system? Is it there? I don't see any democracy. I don't see any social justice as existing at this point of time with the dilution of the labor laws, sir. I seriously, my concern is it's seriously pushing us back towards the 200 years back, like the British colonial system, in the name of democracy. That's being my opinion. I've been the LLM labor law students and working on that, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kusuma. Professor Thorat, this is the last remark by the chairman. Then he will. I'll request Professor Shyamsundar.
Well, I think, it has been very timely lecture, which goes back into the early beginning of liberalization in the early 90s. And most surprising is, and very useful is that it's come down to right in the month of July and August. And the entire period has been covered in a very brief presentation, but in a very pointed manner. So we are really thankful to K.R. Sundar. I think the major point that comes out from the presentation, which some of you have raised this question, is that de jure is not a de facto as far as the labor is concerned. Not only on one aspect, but on several aspects, a legal aspect. I think the one of the political economic question to Sundara would be, what's the politics of it? And including the present situation. But I think we really thank you. You have really educated us on several aspects. I think this is what I will make some comments, and I will have to push and go back to another webinar. So thank you very much.
Yeah, he has a webinar by 6 o'clock. I also have to join.
Yeah, you have also to join by 6 o'clock.
Nevertheless, there is
thank you very much, Professor Sundar. I will come back to you on this later. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And there is a last question by my student Viresha from ISAC. Thank you very much. His question is, how do you see the labor codification in protecting the workers' right? I think this is the last question, and I request Professor Shyamsundar to reflect upon the question which had come in a very brief nutshell.
Yeah. Thank you. Am I? Can I?
Audible. Yeah.
Audible. Yeah. The typical economist question, pitting efficiency against equity. I mean, this whole argument, of course, Rajiv followed it up by saying that's an entrepreneurial question. Well, the law and economics is very clear that laws are created not only for regulation, but also to promote efficiency. That has been one of the major tenets of law and economics. Now, to say that the cost of doing business goes up considerably because of labor laws is to go back to the 19th century and to have a kind of a lawless labor market context or economic market context whereby the so-called cost of production could be minimized. Let us accept the argument that labor cost could increase the total cost or average cost, and thereby it could eat into the profits or whatever it is. Now, if you look at the data, the proportion of labor cost in the total cost, or the proportion of labor cost in the sales turnover, that is because the firms will have to have liquidity. For all the capital intensive industries, it is less than 10%. And for all the labor intensive industries, it is between 25 and 35%. That is argument number one. So labor cost is not really the inhibiting factor which pushes up the cost. Secondly, the share of wages in the value added has considerably declined over the last 30, 40 years to less than 10%. In other words, for every 100 rupees of value added, worker gets only 9 rupees. The profit is 35 rupees. Thirdly, of the employer perception surveys that have been conducted by no less than the neoliberal agency called World Bank, very few employers have cited labor market regulation as one of the top 10 irritants for doing business. It is the various other components of ease of doing business, like enforcing a contract or getting a registration, and availability of power supply, availability of skilled workforce, etc. So seen in any way, I don't think labor laws or trade unions or collective bargaining does impinge in any way efficiency or accelerate the labor cost, I mean the total cost in such a manner to disable the ease of doing business. So the ease of doing business argument has been reasonably punctured by empirical data, so to say, and I need not comb the literature to say that. Suffice to say that the neoliberal labor flexibility studies have been considerably questioned, and lots of holes have been found out by Aditya Bhattacharjee and others, including me. And there is nothing called a labor regulation at all. And that was the burden of my entire speech. And data is, I mean, one of the greatest casualties of neoliberal regime is data. What kind of data are we having when we speak of when the government is not willing to release the data, PLFS or PLFS 2017 or 2018, or reorient the national income data? Empirics has nothing to do with this here. And implementation process, Rajiv of course talked about the implementation. The solution is to go for robust implementation, and that is what Professor Thorat spoke about, the de jure and de facto. And as far as the migrant workers, yes, we have aggressively utilized MG Narega, and that is why the expenses during the month of July has come down. Rural non-farm sector, what do we have? We have horticulture, we have animal husbandry, we have rural infrastructure, and we have rural industrialization, which is kind of a contradiction. So they need to come to urban areas, and recently Odisha government has proactively employed migrant workers in the urban infrastructural projects, municipal projects. So we need to have some kind of a urban employment assurance scheme similar to rural employment assurance scheme. And of course, labor market need to equilibrate because of the push and pull factors. Kerala is a unique situation, so I don't want to talk about that. Kerala has been exemplary in many ways, in either in terms of treating the migrant workers, they call them as guest workers. And now overcoming the Inspector Raj, there is nothing called Inspector Raj, there is nothing to talk about overcoming. We need more implementation. Of course, various others have spoken of dilution of labor laws, taking us back to the colonial system. Labor codes are not going to be a good news for labor rights because the government is not clear as to what kind of labor rights that need to be protected, how they need to be protected. We are talking of universal minimum wage, but we do not have administration system to implement. We are not talking of universal social security code. Whatever, even the existing labor laws that are supposed to protect the unorganized workers have not been fulfilled. So what we need is muscle to the existing labor laws rather than diluting them. I would rather end by saying that there is a reasonable literature that exists on the institutional side that good capital will chase regions with high labor standards. High labor standards mean disciplined and productive workforce. And we all know the efficiency wage theory, which is nothing but, efficiency wage is nothing but a premium over the market wage in order to incentivize, in order to provide a nutritional ability, in order to protect the workers' interests, and also to avoid shirking, so that the workers' productivity will increase in various ways. And the role of labor laws is to preempt, prevent, and to punish labor market opportunism by both the employers and workers. So it is a labor market opportunistic behavior that needs to, that is to protect and then also prevent. That is the function of labor laws. Labor laws do not necessarily increase the cost of production and thereby hurt the competitiveness of firms. Rather, it can be seen as efficiency enhancing agent. A simple fact: a short-term contract, given the asymmetry in the employment contract, will not allow for learning effects on the part of the employers and the workers. If there is a long-term contract, employers and workers will learn, and the asymmetry in the employment contract or the incomplete contract problem could be solved. So this is one of the insights given by law and economics. So why short-term contracts? And short-term contracts will disincentivize the employers to make skill-specific investments in order to improve the employability or the skill of the workers. It is the long-term contracts which incentivize the employers to invest in the human capital and thereby wait to reap the investments. So looking anyway at the labor economics theories, conventional or institutional, we find that labor market regulatory agencies such as trade unions, collective bargaining, labor laws, by ensuring a disciplined and productivity enhancing workforce, will contribute to the competitiveness and efficiency of the business rather than hurting them. Of course, there are always bad lemons, so there can be bad cases on either side. I hope I have answered, but otherwise also I'm available on email. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I thank once again Professor Thorat and Dr. Madheshwaran and all those people who listened patiently to my rather passionate and somewhat compressed presentation of a huge phenomenon in 50 minutes time. Thank you very much to ISEC, and thanks to one and all.
Thanks, thanks, Dr. Shyam. of course, as usual, you are a very effective communicator and a good orator, which is none other than Professor L.K. Deshpande and Professor T.S. Papullo. He is another father of labor economics for us. Used to appreciate you. Of course, Professor Papullo always says that your contribution to the industrial relations will be forever in this country. And of course, you have proved that in your speech, that very comprehensive speech about the industrial relation and the labor laws and its governance. Professor Shyam, thank you very much for giving consent, because he is a popular teacher of XLRI. He is the best teacher of XLRI. And amidst of your teaching schedule, that in fact, Professor Thorat, each and every bit of your sentences he was writing. I know that, you know, I have seen his paper and pen is moving up and down. Since we have another webinar with Duke University, USA, around 6 o'clock, both of us. And otherwise, you know, he just would like to ask many questions, but nevertheless, we'll come back to you once again from ISEC as soon as this pandemic is over, or before that, for a detailed talk on this labor law and labor governance, which is very important organ for the labor market in India. Thank you, Shyam, my dear friend, and which had given a wonderful lecture. And on behalf of ISEC fraternity and behalf of the BOG members and the BOG chairman, the life members, I thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot.
Okay, now the meeting is over, so we will disperse.